Ever get the feeling you're playing a role someone else wrote? Like you're just going through the motions?
Yeah.
That's the vibe I get from John McGahern's The Pornographer. And trust me, there's a lot more to it than just the provocative title. Oh, yeah, that title. Talk about a hand grenade in 1970s Ireland. You got to remember, the Catholic Church basically had a chokehold on the country back then.
Right. So for those of us who didn't live through it, paint us a picture. What was it actually like living under that kind of pressure?
Imagine every aspect of your life, your career, who you dated, even what books you read, all dictated by religious doctrine. It was inescapable, suffocating even.
And McGahern knew a thing or two about that, didn't he?
Oh yeah, his earlier book, The Dark, got him in hot water with the censors.
Really? What happened? Well, let's just say it explored themes of sexuality a little too honestly for their liking. Banned outright in 1965. Scandal, whispers, the whole 9 yards.
So you could say he was already on thin ice. Then he drops a title like The Pornographer. Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
Exactly. It's like he's daring them to censor him again.
Almost begging for judgment, you could say.
That's the brilliance of it, though. That knee-jerk reaction, that judgment, that's exactly what McGahern wants us to confront. He's forcing us to look beyond the surface, to question our own preconceptions about morality and what lies beneath so-called respectable society.
So we're in 1970s Dublin, a society obsessed with keeping up appearances. And smack dab in the middle of it all, we meet our protagonist, a 30-year-old ghostwriting pornography.
Talk about irony, right? McGahern loved throwing you right into the deep end.
No kidding. But it's not just the subject matter, it's the way our protagonist approaches, well, everything. He's detached, mechanical, like he's just going through the motions.
He treats life like one of his manuscripts, something to be churned out, not experienced.
So is there even a real person under there? Or has he disappeared completely into this role he's created?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is this detachment a defense mechanism?
Yeah.
A way of coping with a society that demands conformity above all else?
Like if he lets himself actually feel anything authentically, the whole facade might come crashing down around him.
And then there's the dance hall he frequents, this bleak, almost soul-crushing setting that McGahern describes so vividly.
Oh man, you could practically smell the stale cigarette smoke and desperation clinging to the walls. It doesn't sound like a place anyone actually goes to have fun.
More like a place to run from their own thoughts. And that's where Josephine enters the picture.
And she is, let's just say, a perfect example of the limited options women had back then.
Oh, absolutely. Don't forget, this was a time when women could be legally barred from certain professions if they got married.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah, the infamous marriage bar, basically forced to choose between a career and a family.
Talk about a no-win situation.
And if a woman found herself unexpectedly pregnant, forget about it. The Magdalen laundries, those institutions, cast a pretty long, terrifying shadow over everything.
It's just hard to fathom that kind of fear, that desperation. But here's where it gets interesting. Josephine, despite everything, she actually wants the pregnancy. It's not a burden, it's something she desires.
Which makes her situation even more heartbreaking. She's just trying for some control, some agency, in a society determined to deny her that very thing.
She's not just a victim of circumstance. She's a complex human being making the best of a really bad situation. And it's a side of the story you rarely hear, especially for that time.
Exactly. And that speaks to McGahern's strength as a writer. He creates these nuanced characters, these real people who defy easy categorization. He doesn't sugarcoat the harsh realities, but he allows for these moments of quiet defiance, of hope even, amidst all the darkness.
You know, it's funny you mention hope, because if I'm being honest, The Pornographer is not exactly a feel-good story. It's got this, I don't know, this quiet desperation to it. Kind of reminds me of Stoner by John Williams, which, we've talked about on the show before.
Oh, interesting. I wouldn't have immediately put those two together, but now that you mention it,
Right.
there are definitely some parallels. I mean, both protagonists kind of adrift, bound by duty and obligation. But underneath it all, there's this yearning for something more.
Totally. Like they're just going through the motions, playing their parts. But you get this sense, this underlying scream almost.
And that's where that whole critique of mid-century masculinity gets really interesting, because on the surface, they're conforming.
Right.
But that detachment, that emotional absence, it's kind of a rebellion in itself.
It's like they've perfected the art of disappearing into their own lives.
Exactly.
And everyone else, especially the women in their lives, are left to pick up the pieces.
Think about it. The protagonist in The Pornographer, he's literally profiting off of a society that condemns the very thing he's creating. That irony, that hypocrisy, It's classic McGahern.
And Stoner, he's got his intellectual pursuits and all, but he's still stuck in that rigid academic world. It's like they're both caught in these webs, partly of their own making, sure, but also these societal expectations that keep them there.
It's the ultimate paradox. Trying to find freedom within the very thing that's holding them back makes you wonder, how much agency did they actually have?
Yeah, that's the age-old question, right? Free will versus determinism. Are we really in control of our own destinies, or are we just products of our environment?
And McGahern, like life, doesn't give us any easy answers. He gives us these flawed human characters and then forces us to confront the consequences of their choices, good, bad, or indifferent.
And he does it without judgment, which is what makes it so effective.
Yeah.
He's not telling us what to think. He's inviting us to feel our way through the darkness alongside these characters.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes the most profound truths aren't found in grand pronouncements, but in those quiet moments of introspection, in the questions that stay with you long after you finish the book.
Which brings us to the ending of The Pornographer. Without giving anything away, let's just say our protagonist doesn't exactly have a sudden change of heart. No big redemption arc here.
No, not at all. And that's what makes it so unsettling, so true to life. People, even fictional ones, they rarely have those dramatic epiphanies. Life's messy. Change, when it happens, it's gradual, almost imperceptible.
Like he's always in this state of becoming, but never quite arriving.
And that's McGahern's point, I think. He's not interested in easy answers. He wants us to sit with the discomfort, to recognize that life is complicated. Human experience is complicated.
It's almost like the most courageous act is simply to keep asking questions, even when there aren't any easy answers.
And to embrace the messiness of it all, the contradictions, the things that make us human.
You know, thinking back on everything we've talked about, it feels like this whole idea of responsibility, or rather the lack of it, is kind of at the heart of this book.
It's everywhere you look, right? This sense of emotional evasiveness, especially from the protagonist. He's like a master of deflection, always shifting the blame, trying to outrun any sense of accountability.
Almost like he's saying, hey, it's not my fault. What can I do? But you hit the nail on the head earlier. It's a choice. This helplessness, it's a choice.
100%. And it's tricky because, yeah, he's obviously a product of his time, raised with the church breathing down his neck, this belief system that values marriage above all else. But when does hiding behind those beliefs become a way to avoid making tough choices, you know?
Right, like he's paralyzed, trapped in this cycle of inaction, because actually taking responsibility for his life would mean upsetting the status quo.
Yeah.
And who ends up paying the price for his inertia? Josephine?
Every single time. And that's the thing. It's never just about him, is it? His choices, or lack thereof, they have real consequences, not just for him, but for her, for their unborn child, for everyone around them.
And that's what makes The Pornographer so powerful, so unsettling. It's like McGahern is holding up a mirror to all of us, to our own tendencies to choose the easy way out, to prioritize comfort over courage, even when we know it's not the right thing to do.
It's true, though. How often do we compromise, even a little, to avoid rocking the boat? McGahern's not letting us off the hook, not at all. It's a good reminder that real freedom, real growth, it comes from leaning into responsibility, from owning our choices and acknowledging that those choices impact the world around us.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into The Pornographer, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
It would be easy to write this novel off, right? To say, oh, that was then, this is now. But I think McGahern is tapping into something much deeper, something universal. That tension between individual desire and responsibility to others. And that tension, that's something we're still grappling with today, every single one of us.